There's a moment every gardener has experienced. You walk out after a long week, check on a bed you mulched earlier in the season, and well, something feels different. The soil looks cooler, the plants stand taller, the growth seems almost accelerated, and you wonder why that bed seems to outperform every other patch in your garden. That's exactly what pushed me to uncover the secret ratio I'm sharing today. A ratio that took my yields from good to what on earth happened here, in a single season. This isn't folklore, it isn't theory, and it isn't hype. It's a combination of observation, history, and the same principles used by the most resilient growing systems our ancestors ever built. When you get the mulch ratio right, plants stop fighting to survive and start pouring everything into rapid, vigorous growth. Today, we're diving into the ratio that transforms mulch from a cover into an engine. And once you understand the balance behind it, you'll never look at raw materials the same way again. The secret begins with understanding that most gardeners use either too little mulch or the wrong kind of depth. One of the biggest issues with mulch is inconsistency. Most people toss on a thin layer thinking it's enough to regulate moisture and feed the soil, but in reality that shallow layer dries out, breaks down too quickly, or fails to suppress weeds. On the opposite end, some gardeners pile mulch so deep that the soil suffocates, airflow collapses, and young plants struggle to push through. Neither extreme creates the conditions needed for explosive growth. What I finally realized, after years of trial, error, and studying traditional methods used in drought-prone regions, is that mulch has a threshold. Below it, nothing happens. Above it, the soil starts behaving like a protected underground ecosystem. And the exact depth matters far more than the type of mulch you choose. Now, the sweet spot, the ratio that produces the biggest growth response, is 3 parts mulch to 1 part soil exposure. That means, well, your soil shouldn't be buried under a smothering blanket, but it shouldn't be visible either. A 3-to-1 ratio maintains moisture, shields the soil from heat stress, and feeds microbial life while still allowing oxygen flow. That balance is what triggers the explosion of biological activity beneath your plants, and the biology is what fuels the growth. The 3-to-1 mulch ratio works because it creates the ideal microclimate beneath the surface. The reason this ratio is so powerful goes back to the way soil microorganisms behave. They need oxygen, they need moisture, and they need steady organic inputs. Too much mulch suffocates them. Too little leaves them starved and overheated. But at the right depth, generally around 7 to 10 centimeters, depending on your climate, decomposition proceeds at exactly the speed plants require. This is the same principle used in ancient orchard systems, where farmers would lay straw or shredded bark in controlled layers around fruit trees to encourage rapid early growth. They didn't know the modern science behind microbial respiration or carbon-to-nitrogen balance, but they understood that when the layer was just thick enough to dim the sunlight, but not thick enough to create anaerobic conditions, the trees responded almost aggressively. If you're in a hot region, lean toward the higher end of the ratio by adding a bit more mulch. If you're in a cool, damp region, stay closer to the lower end. The principle remains the same. The mulch must be thick enough to insulate the soil, but loose enough to breathe. Start by clearing any weeds or debris from your planting bed. Water the soil deeply so you're locking in moisture before the mulch goes down. Then take your mulch, whether it's straw, wood chips, chopped leaves or grass cuttings, and begin spreading it evenly across the soil. You should end up with a layer that is thick enough that you can't see the soil in most areas, but thin enough that if you part the mulch with your fingers, the surface of the earth is just beneath it. That's the visual version of the 3-to-1 ratio. For row crops like beans or corn, apply mulch between plants and down the rows, leaving a strip of exposed soil where the stems rise. This prevents stem rot while keeping the root zone heavily insulated. For perennials, tuck mulch right up to the drip line, but not against the trunk. The ratio holds true across almost every plant category. Within a week of applying it correctly, you'll notice something unmistakable. Soil moisture no longer fluctuates wildly. Temperatures stabilize. Earthworms rise toward the surface. And the plants, well, they begin pushing fresh growth faster because they're not fighting environmental stress. In my own gardens, the biggest response came from squash and peppers. Plants that usually lagged in mid-season heat suddenly kept producing without pause. The growth boost doesn't come from the mulch itself. It comes from the life it awakens. When mulch sits at the right depth, fungi begin weaving through the decaying material. Bacteria populations surge, worms pull fragments into the root zone. And, those interactions release nutrients at a pace plants can absorb immediately. This is why beds treated with the 3-to-1 ratio outperform compost-heavy beds in certain conditions. Compost feeds the soil once. Mulch, at the right depth, feeds the soil continuously. I tested this during a season with unusually high temperatures. My mulch beds kept producing. My unmulched beds stalled out. The difference wasn't minor. It was decisive. If you want more practical, field-tested methods like this, the kind of techniques that strengthen your soil, boost your yields and keep your garden resilient year after year, make sure to subscribe to Farm Lab and share this guide with someone who needs it. The knowledge we pass on keeps the next season stronger than the last.